I love America. I love the Constitution. I love the First Amendment. I want to carry enormous guns. I love property. And let me tell you something. If you care about your country, read Ludwig von Mises and the 6 lessons of the Austrian Economic School, motherfuckers.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Sean Thompson. And this is the Sean Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag.
We talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I reminded you of the scum politicians and the sweetheart deals they get with banks and with mortgage companies specifically, and Chris Dodd and his corruption with Barney Frank and Joe Biden with Countrywide, which I believe was right out of the Chicago playbook of cut me in or cut it out. And they gave sweetheart deals to all the political suck-ons. And I want to remind you, when we talk about this, people think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. 9% of the mortgages, 9% tore down the entire economy in 2008 and 9. That's it. And they perpetrated a real trick. There was a lot of scandal that went on. And nobody went to jail, by the way. Nobody went to jail. Between the rating agencies that lied, mostly they were owned by mortgage companies or hedge funds, about the risk in crooked mortgages to two-bit whore politicians like Letitia James and Chris Dodd and the rest of it, and how they packaged it with investments and insurance companies and hedge funds and all different kinds of people believed that rating, and they were lied to. Nobody went to jail from the rating agencies. Nobody went to jail from the mortgage companies. Countrywide, the brothers had a problem, but they should have been in jail years ago before. Who gives a rip about that? They were in bed with the Democrat mafia forever. So when I play this about Letitia, the lipstick that's being put on the pig of her fraud, of her financial crime, is astonishing. But it's also the same fraud that was moved towards Donald Trump's case that Letitia ran on.
In all likelihood, I suspect that he will pardon his family members, his children, his son-in-law, and individuals in his administration, as well as some of his close associates. And then I suspect at some point in time, he will step down and allow the vice president to pardon him. Now, it's important to understand.
So she brought a case. Yeah, let's listen.
He is pardoned from federal crimes, but he is not pardoned from state crimes. Last year, I introduced a bill in the state legislature which would close the pardon loophole so that individuals such as the President of the United States would not evade justice. It's important that we have this check on presidential powers.
You mean like that dimwit in diapers is doing right now, or the rest of his crooked rat family and all the pardons that came out from the auto pen? But aside from that, there was never a plaintiff in the Trump case. Never. No lender, no insurance company. There was never a plaintiff. He was just, unfortunately, a target of how crooked Democrat areas are. You get it before a crooked rat judge, you could do anything, right? That was always the case.
Trump did acknowledge that there could have been a mistake on his financial statement when it came to the value of his Trump Tower apartment, but he said that's why his statements included disclaimer clauses. Quote, there's a disclaimer clause where you don't have to get sued by the Attorney General of New York. Is that in any way a legitimate defense?
No, the judge already found it wasn't. They said...
Crooked rat, fish-faced judge found it. Democrat, as always. But that's not the case with Letitia. Letitia, her evidence was not brought by Donald Trump. It was brought by a forensic accountant who was watching this and said, you know, his name is Sam Antar. I don't like the way this woman is charging a crime when there isn't a plaintiff. So he took a little dive into just her paperwork that is in the public arena.
All right, to further discuss, let's bring in the financial forensic accountant who led the investigation into Letitia James's mortgage fraud. Forensic accountant Sam Antar. Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Lee.
How does it feel after all this hard work? You poured through all the documents. It took a long time. You posted this. You posted the document trail on social media. You're saying that this case is pretty cut and dry. Of course, Tish James is saying that this is weaponization of the federal government. Your thoughts? I know you said this is just the beginning.
Yes, this is just the beginning. There's a lot of hard work left to do. First of all, what they did was they indicted her on her Peroni Avenue property, not the property that you put up on the screen over there. The Peroni Avenue property she purchased in 2020. When I was looking at her financial disclosures, I noticed that the property had no mortgage in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And all of a sudden, in 2023, in her financial disclosures to New York State, 2 mortgages appear exceeding the value of her property by 200%.
That's exactly what she accused Trump of. 200% of what the value is, and somehow this fat, manly, 3-foot ass crack simpleton was able to get 2 mortgages for the total of 200%. How is that even possible?
So what I did was I went backwards and I pulled up the title report. And what I found was the 2 properties the 2 mortgages she claimed on the property weren't in the property records. But the mortgage that she used to buy the property, which is the subject of the indictment, was not disclosed on our financial disclosures from 2020 when she purchased the property to 2023. Now, when I finally got the documents with the title report, I looked at the mortgage and it said it was supposed to be her secondary residence, not an investment property. Now, the feds have her tax returns. You can look at paragraph 10 or section 10 of the indictment. It says that she showed income in 2020 and that she used it as a rental property, contrary to what she said to the bank. It was going to be a second home for her. But here's where we're going to break news today. All right. In her financial disclosures to New York State, she showed income on the property in 2020. However, she did not show any income on the property in 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. If the feds, and if you're listening to me today, have her Schedule E for 2021 through 2024, and it shows income, she committed mail fraud on the state of New York because she did not disclose that income in her financial filings and ethics filings with New York State.
So that's why you're saying this is just the beginning. So this whole narrative that the news, that even Tish James, I'm seeing Democrat leaders spinning that President Trump is the one that did this to her. Who is responsible?
No. I did this to her, okay? I was examining her financial filings with New York State, and as any forensic accountant would do, I worked backwards. I worked backwards to a property filings, and then I reported it to the feds, as any responsible forensic accountant would do.
Remember that, because you're going to hear the exact opposite for the next 48 hours of the weekend. By the time it's over, 3-foot of ass crack, Letitia James, she'll be the victim. Tomas, Blue Island.
Hey, Sean, part of what's wonderful about Trump world are the amazing women, the Pam Bondis, the Ivanka Trumps, the Caroline Levitts, the Kayleigh McEnany's. Well, the U.S. attorney on this Letitia James case, this evil, fat, ugly pig, is
I'm pretty sure that was her sorority nickname. Go ahead.
Lindsay Halligan. And about 10 years ago, she was the 3rd runner-up for Miss Colorado. And I got to know where Trump finds all these beautiful women.
He owned the Miss America pageant. Remember that? I think that's where he gets it. But nonetheless, it's an amazing thing when you take a look at what we're looking at. I mean, not for nothing, but these are some rough-looking people. I mean, if it's not just Letitia, who would scare Mean Joe Green. I mean, he's old now, but she'd scare the dung out of him. There's that Katie Porter in California.
If we don't electrify our transportation sector, that we're going to lose more than 500,000 Californians dying prematurely to air pollution and other problems. And the state could lose. Get out of my shot.
I wanted to tell you that.
This is why you should have never gave Shirley Temple steroids and introduced her to an all-you-can-eat countrywide buffet. And then there's the other one. Spanberger.
During last night's heated debate, Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat candidate for Virginia governor,
a rough name,
faced repeated questioning over her continued support for Attorney General candidate Jay Jones after text messages surfaced in which he fantasized about putting, quote, 2 bullets in the head of...
He's a peculiar looking fella, too. Do you see him? You know what it is, Squirrel? It's the soul. It's not the outer appearance, because if you look at him, maybe they're not throw up in your mouth ugly. But it's the soul that makes them ugly. The fact that they stand there, lie, right to everybody's face, like Spanberger, who looks like a Nick Nolte on a Saturday morning around 6 a.m.
Then Republican Virginia House Speaker Todd Gilbert. Watch this.
Will you continue to endorse Jay Jones to be the next Attorney General of Virginia?
So the public was unaware who had knowledge of these text messages for many hours.
What did you do about
I learned of these text messages the day that they came out, and I denounced them as soon as I learned of them.
What you're saying is that as of now, you still endorse Jay Jones as Attorney General?
I'm saying as of now, it's up to every voter to make their own individual decision.
And that's not going to deter one welfare roach. They're going to vote Democrat regardless of the text messages. I'm just more impressed that they continue to vote for the ugliest people in our society today. And in there lies the real issue. And now when you cross over and you talk about the lawyers, whether it's Mark Elias, who looks like he's 80,
to be pursued, perhaps have their house raided, and if they can find a bare minimum of a grand jury quorum anywhere, they will get indicted. And the days of the Department of Justice and the rules that everyone keeps citing to me, well, the rules of this, rules of that, those rules, that rule book is gone. Okay, those rules are gone. This is a president who believes he controls the Department of Justice and he decides who's...
Well, maybe it's that law should be enforced, you thief, you fraud, you moron, shyster. And it's funny when you look at the things that this guy is attached to. He's attached to PACs. He's attached to politicians. Mark Elias is attached to a tremendous amount of skullduggery when it came to this election theft of 2020. We're not going to pretend that that was anything other than the election theft. But one thing you have to understand is all of these areas, what their big fear is that the rule of law will be enforced. That's all it is. It's against the law to perpetrate fraud, perpetrate mortgage fraud, to perpetrate mail fraud, to perpetrate all kinds of fraud. It's all against the law. And that's what your big fear is. Proving, again, who you represent. Who do you really represent? You represent the criminals, the party of the cartels, the party of the domestic terrorist organizations.
But Kamala Harris encouraged Americans to donate to the so-called Minnesota Freedom Fund. You know what that is? Which bailed out the rioters, looters, assaulters, and anarchists from jail. And Biden's staff did the same thing. They donated a lot of their money to get them out of jail so that everyone was right back on the streets. Think of that. This is what is running for office. This is what we're competing against. And the primary competitor, Joe, he's in his basement. He just doesn't come out. They don't ask him questions. I said, I wish they asked him a couple about 2 months ago. It was like, hey, hi, are you enjoying your run?
Well, that's because the Democrat mafia can get a moron, whether it's in New York, an Islamo-Nazi communist moron, whether it's Chicago, bust out on a water payment plan, whether it's California, the son of a lawyer who worked for an oil magnate multi-billionaire, and now he's running on the climate. They can get anybody elected. And the reason is there's a lot of money in corruption, a tremendous amount of money in corruption.
You remember that back in June when riots inspired by the death of George Floyd were destroying America's cities, particularly its low-income communities, Kamala Harris was working to help the instigators, the criminals, get out of jail. She tweeted this, quote, if you're able to, chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. The Minnesota Freedom Fund, what's that? Well, it's apparently a nonprofit. It's received tens of millions of dollars since this summer, thanks in part to the support of people like Kamala Harris.
The reason I play this is because this is how they do the pass-throughs to finance domestic terrorists. there are consequences to this.
Twice convicted rapist, currently charged with kidnapping and sexual assault, and he walks out too.
The Freedom Fund raked in donations when it was promoted by many, including now Vice President Kamala Harris.
John Michael Tillman shot and killed a passenger on a train platform after reportedly being released from jail 3 weeks prior. All thanks to the Minnesota Freedom Fund.
Donovan Boone was charged with breaking into the home of an ex-girlfriend and choking her. Freedom Fund.
So now this is getting linked to Antifa, and other terrorist organizations are getting linked to Antifa. So now it comes time to run interference.
You understand, there's no Antifa. This is an entirely imaginary organization. There is not an Antifa. This is no different than if they announced they rounded up a dozen Decepticons. We've captured the Chupacabra, everyone. And then it was Trump's turn to ratchet up the rhetoric with fiery images conjured from no one has any idea where.
Rutgers students have launched a petition calling for Professor Mark Bray to be fired, citing his ties to Antifa and his book on militant anti-fascism. The petition argues Bray's promotion of political violence and his Antifa handbook threaten conservative students on campus. Bray, an assistant professor and author, has previously discussed Antifa tactics, drawing criticism from institutions like Dartmouth.
He says once this executive order starts to be unfolded, he hopes they look into some of these organizations who are funding this, saying one of the international groups that actually pays these terrorists in the United States is called the International Antifa Defense Fund. They operate fundraising campaigns on Patreon, Fundraiser, and the Action Net. Where does this money come from? How does it make its way in? Militant Antifa activist and Rutgers assistant professor Mark Bay donates proceeds from his Antifa handbook to the group. So they buy his book and he gives the money back to the terrorists. So that's interesting.
So you're going to hear this weekend, Letitia James is the victim of Donald Trump versus the perpetrator of financial crimes. And then you'll hear there's no Antifa sissies pretending to be anti-fascists when they're implementing the terrorism of the fascists called American Democrats.
A Rutgers University history professor who's written multiple books about Antifa says he's moving out of the country after receiving multiple death threats, including to his home. Professor Mark Bray notified students this week that his courses will move online as he relocates to Europe with his family for safety.
So it was the death threats that he got. I said, boy, that doesn't sound real to me. I mean, if you want to talk about death threats, you could go to an Antifa 400-pound white woman leaving a death threat to the head of ICE in Chicago.
Hey, I'm just calling to say, assuming you're married to and with a last name like that, I don't know how you let your husband work for ICE and you sleep at night. You, your family. I hope your kids get deported by accident. How do you sleep? You. Did you hear what happened to the Nazis after World War II? Because that's what's going to happen to your family.
That's what's being left to ICE capo here in Illinois. And it's funny when you think about what they're protecting. I mean, after all, everybody knew Chicago was the city of iniquity. But more importantly, who ran it? The cartels, the drug dealers, the gangs, and the scum.
During the entire Iraq War, there was on average, unfortunately, 435 combat deaths per year. During the Afghanistan War, there was on average 141 combat deaths per year. All tragic. American blood and treasure. Between 2018 and 2022, when Kim Foxx was the state's attorney, the DA in Chicago, there was an average of 660 murders per year. So there are parts of Chicago that are much more dangerous than war zones. And there is no defense to that.
No, there is a defense to it. By the criminals who profit from it, called politicians. That's who will defend it over and over.
What we imagine would happen is that they have to decide whether or not they're going to follow the judge's ruling. The judge made it very clear that there was no credibility from the Trump administration, that this was, to me, in so many ways, as I've been saying, a manufactured crisis.
Lieutenant Governor, who answers the question, what would Gregory Hines look like if he shaved his mustache? We'll be back.
He believes in freedom, capitalism, and individual liberty. And because of that, he's become an enemy of the state. He's Sean Thompson, and this is The Sean Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.